Hey guys, good to see you here for this special live stream. We're going to be looking at Alec Baldwin's statement made on the same day of the incident, the 21st of October last year, around about 6 months ago now. And we're going to sort of evaluate what he's saying, how he's saying it, and also look at some of the nuances in that particular interview, some things that are, how can I put it, some things that are obvious and some things that are not so obvious, right? So we're going to go through that. I've got about 4 or 5 pages worth of notes here. And I did ask some of my patrons also to make notes. I'm not sure if you guys have. It's good to see some of you here. Jean Karras, definitely good to have you in. Is Stephanie here? Nancy Christensen, Zenaida Rivera, production profiles, good to see you. Scott Rayburn, Pauline Buckles, Bria, it's also good to see you here. We are going to be quite strict in terms of comments. Bear in mind, we're not trying to put Alec Baldwin on trial. We're simply trying to evaluate what he said and try and get a bit more insight into the whole incident. That's really what we're trying to do. Git is here as well, one of our members. She says it's bedtime here in Sweden and I'm going to close my eyes and just listen. Okay. I have heard that some people use me as ASMR, and if that's your cup of tea, good for you. It is 11 o'clock at night where I am. It's very cold. I think in Sweden it might be pretty late as well. What time is it in France, Bria? And Bria, are you happy with the election of your new president or kind of old president? Because I think it's the first time ever that a French president's been re-elected. Miss T, good to see you. So I'm just going to waffle on for another 2.5 minutes and then try and sort of get going. SM, good to see you here. Janet Babb. Thought Criminal says, sounds like you have a sore throat. I have a little bit of a sore throat. It's a bit scratchy. I slept with the air conditioner on, but like with the temperature quite high, not low. And that did seem like that did something. Donna Stone says it's 5 p.m. in Kentucky, so it's around home time, I guess, in certain parts of America. Oh, Git says it's the same time in Sweden. Is it still light outside in Sweden? I am a little bit chesty, I guess. I did go to a barbecue last night. That I think was also a factor. Was sort of outside in sort of wintry air, kind of on a balcony. So, yeah. Thought Criminal says, be careful of pneumonia. Yeah, definitely. 10 p.m. in Scotland. Okay, so also quite late there. Right, so as a sort of prelude, good to see you, Goat Radio. Okay. As a sort of prelude to this episode, I'm going to share with you a little bit of an anecdote. Hi, Sharon Drury from Colorado Springs. And then I'm going to come back to the anecdote at the end of this show. So what I'm about to tell you isn't irrelevant. It's not just sort of small talk, right? So today, Ivy caught a little bird, right? And when I sort of went downstairs, I'm going to give you the context at the end of the episode. When I went downstairs, I was kind of looking for the cat and I just heard this growl, and she never really growls. And I saw the tail, and the cat was in the corner of the lounge, kind of under a chair, and not where she usually hangs out, kind of with her back to me and her tail kind of curling out towards me. And then she growled. And that's usually a sign that she's caught something and she's trying to defend it. And so I quickly went over and she quickly ran off with a guilty conscience. And there was a little bird. My first impression was that this little bird was not a baby bird, but a juvenile. I don't actually think it was. I think it was an adult female sparrow. But it was so traumatized by virtually being eaten by a monster that I was able to just sort of lean over, pick it up with my hand, and then I sort of walked outside. So I didn't even try and step away. It didn't try and fly away when I reached down for it. And then I went outside, and there was a little bit of blood on. I sort of first looked at it, and it seemed to be completely fine. But then I noticed a slight injury on its back, and another slight injury on its sort of on its front. Very little, but there was a little bit of red on my fingers. And then I opened my hand, and it flew off, but not very far. And that is it. I'll give you more context about that little anecdote and how it relates to rust at the end of this. So keep that in the back of your mind. Chapo EMT, good to see you. Lunar Star, yeah, it is quite sad. I certainly felt quite guilty about it and quite bad about it. And I'll tell you why as well. China Rose says it's 10 past 2. Where are you? Are you in California or Australia? Lunar Star says it's 10 past 4 and 70 degrees in Oklahoma. Okay. Pauline says, well, I don't know if the bird died. As far as the last time I saw it was alive, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure how bad its injuries were. But when a cat gets hold of a bird, spends any length of time with it, it's not really a good prognosis. Okay, so we've got about, we at about the 7-minute mark, got about 70 people in. I want to get going with my notes. So the first thing to mention, and I did put a link to the 35-minute video, is that Alec Baldwin was interviewed by 2 female officers. Now, what do you think about that? Do you think that's relevant or not relevant? Also, do you think there could have been a different, how can I put it? Do you think there could have been a different vibe if both of the officers were male officers? What do you guys think? Janet Babs from Ottawa, certified quality, says it's 5:13 in the afternoon in New York. Okay. So you must bear in mind what we're dealing with here, or who we're dealing with here. And I think it's worth comparing Alec Baldwin just in terms of the setup. I'm not really trying to make any inferences. I'm just saying, if you compare Chris Watts, interviewed by one person, in his case by Coda in the beginning, Coda kind of allowed him to talk quite a lot, and also at a certain point didn't really accept what he was saying. I think at one point he said, I think what you're saying is horse manure or something like that. Right. And in other words, he kind of took control. He allowed Chris Watts some room to move, but every now and then he would sort of reel him in. Right. And then you had a different kind of tactic with the female agent in that case. Right. But nevertheless, there's a sort of something is going on. Now, the question is, when Alec Baldwin was questioned, he wasn't questioned by agents, he was questioned by officers, as far as I understand. And they were both female officers, and fairly young female officers as well. And so just a question to ask at the outset is, did the mere fact that there were 2 female officers, and also not one, but 2 female officers, and opposite a male movie star, male celebrity, did that have an impact on the dynamic? Another thing, just in a very sort of, what's the word? What do they call it? Just in a very, very basic way, you're dealing with a elderly man, a man who is, in his, I think he's 60 plus. He's kind of a respected person in certain ways. And then you've got two female officers. So in a sort of a certain way, I can't quite think of the word that I'm looking for, not primal, but in a sort of a strange way, you almost have a father figure scenario, right? I'm not saying that is what is consciously felt or seen, but it may be something that is unconsciously experienced, and that may have an impact, maternal. Yeah, but I'm thinking of it more in terms of it's not arch. I just can't think of the word. So that's the first thing just to bear in mind is the dynamic between the officers and Alec Baldwin. And you must remember, Alec Baldwin is no ordinary individual. He is someone who's charismatic, is intelligent, he's a performer, is an actor, is used to saying certain things and performing, and he knows how to his job is to create scenes and to bring certain emotions to them and to some extent influence the audience, right? And so are we seeing Alec Baldwin being completely genuine, and is he being completely sort of is this Alec Baldwin with the acting switch turned off, or is that something that doesn't really happen with actors? They can't not act. Just these are just questions. The other thing that you sort of see kind of at face value is he's dressed casually. He's wearing like a darkish blue T-shirt. He's not wearing his cowboy gear. He's not wearing his cowboy hat. It was quite interesting in the aftermath to the whole thing. He was like the only guy wearing a cowboy hat. So despite the fact that something had happened, he still had his cowboy hat on. I think the only other person that also had a cowboy hat on was maybe Mitchell. And it could be because of the sun, could be to not get sunburnt or something like that. But anyway, in this cubicle, he's not wearing his cowboy hat, not wearing his cowboy clothes, and his mask is right beside him, and kind of a big bottle of water. And you kind of see the two cops. One of them is taking notes actively. The other is sort of looking at her phone now and then and takes maybe a less active role, right? So, Stephanie, good to have you here as well. Welcome. Stevie Yeager says, did the female officers know how he treated Kim Basinger? So those kind of questions aren't really relevant to what we're talking about here. We're trying to study and evaluate the statement. So, to do that, you go totally out of the ambit of what you're trying to do here, right? But it is possible that they've got some... they may have some negative or positive bias based on whatever they know from the media or not. Although it doesn't seem that way. It doesn't seem as though they are starstruck or anything like that. So at the outset, we see he's questioned by two female officers. He's dressed casually. It looks like he may even have had a shower. I don't know whether his hair is like that because he showered or whether it's because of hat hair. That could also be a factor. And then someone said they were quite surprised to hear him Mirandized. He's told that he's got the right to remain silent. He's told that if he's got any questions, and at that point he actually breaks in. He says, I actually do have a question. He says, my only question is, am I being charged with something? That's actually his first question. Now, I suppose one could say, could he not also ask, okay, how is Helena right now? or something like that. But his first question is really about himself. And I suppose you could also say, wouldn't anyone in that situation ask the same sort of question? Am I in trouble? Why are you actually asking me these questions? Goat Radio, thanks very much. So he actually kind of interrupts being Mirandized. Now, often when someone is Mirandized, it's kind of a speech that the authorities give. You have the right to remain silent. If you blah, 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 you have the right to an attorney, whatever, that whole spiel. And Baldwin actually interrupts being Mirandized to say, it's like something that somewhere in it they say, if you have any questions, and then he says, yes, I do have a question. My only question is, am I being charged with something? And then he sort of says, I'm not worried. He doesn't really complete the sentence because they sort of respond and then he sort of chuckles. But at the same time that he says, am I being charged with something, he also kind of almost answers his own question and says, I'm not worried. He doesn't say, because I didn't do anything, but it seems like that's what he's sort of getting at. It's almost the same thing he said on ABC News. I don't feel guilty. I don't feel bad about what happened, or I don't feel guilty, so, I don't feel bad about what happened, kind of thing. I'm kind of paraphrasing what he said, but it's basically, he said, I don't feel guilty because I didn't do anything wrong, right? So, and this all happens in the first minute of the 35-minute interview, and he kind of chuckles there, and so the tone starts off. So he's actually being Mirandized, and he sort of chuckles at this point, and is kind of lighthearted. Now, to go back to the Chris Watts interview, I don't really want to talk about so much him being Mirandized, but at around about the same time that he was going to be polygraphed, the polygrapher did say to him, almost in a joke, said, you'd be really dumb to take this polygraph if you were lying, right? But she kind of also makes a joke. And it's actually not a joke, but that is the strategy she's using. She's trying to influence him almost as if to say, this isn't a big deal, and it's not deadly serious. And you could make the argument that she's trying to influence him to make him comfortable when he really shouldn't be comfortable. And one could almost ask the same thing here. Is Baldwin lighthearted in a way to almost set the officers at ease? He's not sort of, it doesn't feel like a life and death situation when actually someone's life is on the line, and Helena would die. I'm not sure if it was during the course of this questioning or after. And bear in mind, a lot of people criticize Nicole Kessinger for her levity, given that didn't they know then what the status was of some of the Watts family members. So I do think it's appropriate to ask, given what's just happened, bear in mind that it just happened like an hour or two earlier, is it appropriate to be sort of chuckling and whatnot? And to be fair, you can't say, you can have a very, very bad thing happen. And for example, some people have gone to concentration camps and they use joking to deal with terrible trauma. So it's not to say that it's absolutely forbidden and nobody should ever do it. But it's also not to say that it's absolutely irrelevant and you should never even think about it. Sometimes humor is a coping strategy, but sometimes it's also a way to influence someone to make them more casual and less disciplined than they might otherwise be, right? So I'm not sure, I've written here, I'm not sure there's anything to be lighthearted about. And I'm referring to in the first minute here. He's being Mirandized. It's about you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in court. It's definitely not fiddlesticks. And later on, all these lawsuits have come out and charges. So this is serious stuff. It's not stuff to make light about. The other thing I want to draw your attention to, and you may miss it. If you've watched the interview, you're welcome to watch it again, with bearing in mind what I'm telling you. By the way, I'm dealing with these notes just with the first 5 minutes. So it's a 35-minute interview. I'm dealing with only the first 5 minutes, and basically on how this live stream goes, I might do, part 2, part 3, part 4, part 4, up to part 7. But this is just really a preliminary analysis. But you can listen to the first 5 minutes again and ask yourself, does Baldwin's forceful personality come through in the first minute or 2 or 3? And I would argue that it does. And I would also argue that he is a forceful personality. You might choose other words instead of forceful. You might say he's a charismatic person, or he's a strong personality. When I say forceful, I mean he's someone that, he does have a strong personality. And often when someone is assertive or forceful, then the other person will be the opposite. What's the opposite of forceful? Let me actually look that up. Yeah, strong energy. Let me just look up opposite of forceful. I'm still bugged by that word that I couldn't think of. So the opposite of forceful is weak or submissive, right? And so you can kind of ask yourself, are the officers, are the law enforcement folks sitting with him, are they basically submissive? Are they quiet when he's talking? Are they forceful as well, or what is kind of going on? You can just ask yourself that question a couple of times and see what you think. Graham says exerts dominance, right? And so another way to ask the question is, who is the power in the room? It's the same question you could ask in the Chris Watts case. When Chris Watts was talking to Tammy Lee, especially during the lie detector, who actually had the power in the room? The answer is obvious. It was Tammy, right? When Kessinger was interviewed, who had the power in the room, right? So in terms of this interview, who has the power in the room? And you can ask that question at the 1 minute mark, you can ask it at the 2 minute mark, you can ask it after 5 minutes, you can ask it after 10 minutes, you can ask it again and again and again, but you kind of want to ask that question and be confident that you know what the answer is. I also think when you have a forceful personality who's also a celebrity, and you've got 2 female officers that are questioning him, this question of who is the power in the room does become quite relevant. How relevant? You might say it's a little bit relevant, you might say it's fairly relevant, or you might say it's extremely relevant. Now, after basically the first minute, right? So he's been Mirandized, which, as I say, kind of interrupts. After that sort of statement, there's sort of a kind of an interlude. And in that interlude, Alec Baldwin can be heard sighing audibly. He sort of sighs. That sigh speaks a lot about I'm communicating my feelings of frustration. I'm communicating perhaps that I'm tired. I'm expressive. I'm not holding back how I feel, right? It also seems to be communicating I've had a long day, right? And I think that is what the one officer says. He sighs and she says long day. And so already you kind of have the beginnings of a dynamic. He sighs and the officer kind of asks him how he's feeling, right? And then he actually starts talking, right? And he makes kind of a speech at this point. And he's sort of saying, what's interesting, not to digress on some commentary, and I just find his choice of words there quite interesting. Is that the way Alec Baldwin normally talks? I don't know. I don't know how he normally talks. That's why I said it's difficult to tell, is this Alec Baldwin the actor acting, or is this Alec Baldwin the actor not acting? or somewhere in between. But I don't think I would use the word digress very easily. I might say, but I digress, but not sort of easily. But I'm not Alec Baldwin, right? So this is how he starts, kind of quite a long comment that he kind of volunteers, right? They haven't asked really a single question. He sighs, someone says long day, and he says, what's interesting, not to digress on some commentary. And then my impression is that he does digress on commentary, and I'll explain what I mean by that. So at this point, he sort of shakes his head and he talks about, we did it the right way every day, shakes his head again, and he says every day. And what he means by these fairly generalizations is he seems to mean we followed protocols the right way every day, right? And this was a statement he made on the day, right? It wasn't like a period of time went by, so he may have forgotten what was going on. He made the statement that day when something had happened and following other days of shooting, right? And he said, we did it right. We did it the right way every day. Well, a report has just come out that seems to indicate that they didn't do it the right way, that protocols weren't followed. And I think they referred to plain indifference as the issue with what was going on the set. So, where this is almost like the first thing he says is, we did it the right way every day. And shakes his head again and then says every day. And there I think one's got to ask, in hindsight now, has that position been kind of vindicated in terms of what has been found by the occupational Health and Safety Bureau of New Mexico? In other words, what he said here, is it accurate in terms of what we've now discovered in hindsight, right? That is why, again, one's got to ask these questions. This is a forceful personality. Who has the power in the room? And, there's a sort of a light-hearted thing going on. And is it just off the cuff, or is something else going on? Is there a bit of a power struggle going on? Is there an attempt to influence, or what is going on? And I think anybody in a situation, whether you're innocent or guilty, anyone who's sitting in a police cubicle in that situation, you want, if you can influence the law enforcement in a way that they're going to accept what you're saying, I think you would want that, right? So it would be crazy to say, I want to speak to law enforcement, but I don't want to convince them. I don't want to be convincing. Obviously, you do want to be convincing. The question is, are you being convincing in a sincere way, or in a manipulative way, or in a deceptive way? So the other thing to bear in mind, and I'm really now only talking about the first minute and a half, right? We only had 90 seconds, and I've already been talking to you guys for half an hour, maybe just 20 minutes about this. But Alec Baldwin takes the initiative. It's not that he sits there and they ask him questions. He takes the initiative, totally different to Chris Watts. Chris Watts answers, and his answers are quite brief, but he's been asked a question. He gives an answer. He doesn't really give much of an answer. But here, Alec Baldwin takes the initiative, and he volunteers, and he gives his story, right? And if you take the substance of what he's talking about, he's talking about rounds. He's talking about, he uses words like cosmetic, right? He gestures a gun, like with his hand like this. So he's very demonstrative, he's very expressive, he's very communicative, and he's sort of demonstrates like this, pointing to the other officer. He talks of cosmetic rounds, he talks of flash, I'm not sure if it's flash loads. And my impression of all this is this quick jump to Was it a dummy round? Was it a flash round? There's sometimes wadding, this and that. It's like, it's immediately confusing. It's like, why are we even talking about this? She was obviously shot. Is there any way that her life could be in danger if it was a dummy round? And I think there is a long shot thing to that, but I don't think that's the first thing you think about. I don't think you think the dummy round was defective and it went off. I don't think your first thought is a dummy round went off. I think your first thought is that was a real bullet, right? Am I wrong? And yet he keeps talking about cosmetic rounds, and the question is he confused or is he confusing the subject? Is he murking the subject or is he not sure what happened? And the thing is, the person who ought to have been the clearest about what was going on, you would imagine would be him, because there were other people around him that were quite clear early on, right? And of course you could say maybe he was in shock, or maybe he was in shock for 30 seconds or a minute, and even longer, half an hour. Does he appear to be in shock where you see him now, where he's chuckling and he asks, he's got the presence of mind to say right in the beginning, to say, my only question is, am I being charged with something? That seems like someone who's sort of pretty awake and pretty, So I think what we're obviously dealing with is a live round, and yet he's talking repeatedly of these cosmetic rounds and so on. And he does the same thing in the ABC News interview. He spends a lot of time talking about wadding and this can happen and that can happen. And all of that is really a distraction from what did happen. I mean, they are sitting in the cubicle not to talk about what could have happened or what should have happened, but what did happen. And he seems to be talking about what could have happened or what may have happened in terms of we did it the right way every day. Well, if they did it the right way every day, why are they sitting in the situation? Then there is a moment, and again, it comes to this question, who has the power in this room? There's a point where Baldwin says, she disarmed me. I think he's talking about that day before lunch. He says, she disarmed me, and that's a reference to Hannah. And the officer stops him and says, who's she, right? Tell me who she is. And then he says, oh, Hannah, and he gives her name. And then he says, we go to lunch, and we came back from lunch. And so, I don't know, I might be giving Baldwin a hard time when he doesn't deserve it, but I thought something significant happened during lunch. I thought the changes to the script were material. They were material enough for maybe Mitchell to mention them. I think where Hannah went and did Hannah go to lunch early or did she come back early? I think that's also material. But he kind of sketches lunch as almost a nothing. We went to lunch, we came back from lunch, and then blah, blah, blah. If I was the officer there, I would have stopped him and said, I would have asked him, what happened at lunch? What time did you go for lunch? How long was lunch? What did you eat for lunch? What did you drink for lunch? Who did you talk to during lunch? What is Helena doing? All that kind of thing. Julie says he's used to greasing the wheels. Okay, China Rose says he's already pleading his case. Guys, just be careful with making too explicit. Bear in mind, Alec Baldwin hasn't been charged with anything, right? So we're just trying to examine what he's saying here. So let's just try and keep our thoughts on that. Like, let's not try and be judge, jury, and executioner here. Let's let's look at what he's saying here. Let's not try and jump the gun. So anyway, he doesn't describe what was said at lunch, which to me is material. I think it's quite important to acknowledge that at some point he wanted as far as I'm aware, at some point he wanted somebody wanted the way that he was going to be presenting the firearm to be presented in a way that was going to be quite artistic, or there's going to be a certain camera angle. In other words, there was some fussing around that whole idea. There was some, yeah, you're right, Robbie, it might be. So at 3 minutes 29 seconds, Baldwin describes, it's his first description of how he draws the weapon, right? And so he says something about sneaking the gun out slowly. And so once again, this is something that just sort of irks a little bit. He says, what we were going to do in this rehearsal is I was going to sneak the gun out slowly. And so he uses the word slowly, but he never uses the word quickly, right? And to me, what you see is him drawing the gun quickly. He sort of whips it out really quickly. So where's the slow part? So again, there's this emphasis on slow, but in the end, he whips the gun out quickly. And isn't that what cowboys do? Aren't cowboys known for being the fastest gunslinger in the West, for being, the quick and the dead kind of thing, for being quick on their feet, quick thinking? And isn't Harland Rust, isn't he such a big shot because he is so fast? He's old, but he's not rusty kind of thing. He's old, but the rust hasn't set in. Isn't that the point of like cowboy movies, that you look at these guys and you're like, wow, you're quick-witted. It's not about how slow you are, it's about how quick-witted and fast and accurate you are, right? Pauline Buckle says, quick draw McGraw. Kathleen Allen says, I would have to check the gun just to be sure. Graham Stanifer says, the slowest drawer in the West, maybe he is a bit rusty. Graham also talks about, is that controlling the narrative? So Baldwin then goes on to say, I think she was hit in the right armpit. So you'll notice that he can sometimes speak in very symbolic language. It's very general, it's very broad. And once again, he doesn't say, he says, I think she was hit in the right armpit. She is Helena. And then he says, this is at 3 minutes 56. He says, I turn and cock the gun goes off. And this is where I think he is demonstrating this. This is where he's kind of performing it, right? He's showing what he's doing. And this is where I've got to ask, does he cock the gun? I've kind of put a question mark there, right? Can you see that over there? Does he cock the gun? And I think that's an important question, because in the rehearsal footage that we saw, he doesn't cock the gun, right? And that may be, well, that is that footage, and on a different day, he had to do something else. And the impression I got on the ABC News interview was that specifically the cocking of the gun was what they wanted to capture, right? Or am I wrong? Or am I wrong? That's quite a critical question. Was the idea, is it in the script that the cocking of the gun is captured, or is it that he quickly pulls the gun out and is immediately cocked? Because that's the video I made previous to this, is you see him whip out the gun and it's already cocked. And so in this statement that he makes at 3 minutes 56, so you could really argue within the first 5 minutes, he's already said, described this critical motion, turning and cocking the gun, and then he says the gun goes off. And for me, the critical question is, did he not turn with the gun already cocked And because his finger was on the trigger, that was why it went off. That's the critical question. Now, in order to ascertain that, you probably need to ask other people who were there what exactly was happening. Was it literally him cocking the gun? What exactly was going on? And, there are quite a few people that I think would be in a position to answer that. On the other hand, it's possible they weren't really paying that much attention. They were paying attention to the lighting, or they were paying attention to something on the monitor. But I would submit that they probably were paying attention, because that's what you pay to do. You pay to pay attention to details like light readings, but also to what you're trying to capture. On the other hand, they were stressed, and they would normally have been they would have normally have had, I think, 2 monitors at their disposal, but because the camera crew had quit, they were less one camera and I think less one monitor. Otherwise, they could have captured that scene on a remote monitor. Anyway, at this point, Baldwin says he's puzzled and emotional, and getting emotional. So he actually says this. He says this himself. He says, I'm puzzled and I'm getting emotional. And then at the same time that he says getting emotional, he says, I'm older now, and he smiles. And so it's not like he says I'm emotional and then he sort of breaks down or wipes a tear. He says he's emotional, but then he kind of smiles. He says, I'm older now. And he says, I've never seen a theatrical round. I don't know if he said go through someone's armpit or went through someone's armpit, come out the other side. He's still kind of insisting that this is a theatrical round. He's kind of insisting that on this narrative, he's insisting that this is what he knows and this is what he believes, right? And that's what he's doing in the first 5 minutes. He's insisting that that his knowledge is that it's not a live round. And yet you've got to ask yourself, how on earth would you be thinking this given what had happened? I mean, the first police officers on the scene weren't really thinking that. So, as I've written here, he's still suggesting he thinks it's a dummy or flash round. And so the question is, does he really think that? Does he really think that it was a theatrical round, or does he want the officers and then later other people to think that that's what he thought? Now, he then brings the following up, and once again, you've got to ask the question, who is in control of this interview, and just what a forceful personality he has, and what a assertive person he is. Because the next thing he says is, I'm wondering if your department is prepared to find out what came out of his shoulder. Is that a live round, right? That's what he asks them. He basically asks the cops, like basically to do their jobs in a way. He says, I'm wondering if your department is prepared to find out. Can you go and look into his shoulder and see what came out? Is that a live round? So he's kind of persisting with this, not knowing what it could possibly be. And obviously they did perform surgery on Joel Souza, and what they took out was a live round, and he makes quite a big thing of that on ABC News, where he talks about it was a slug. It was from a real bullet kind of thing. Now, this is where I have a little bit of this is my personal opinion. And I say this as someone who has been in the military, not very long, but I was in the military. You have an experience when you use a weapon. So we are looking at this from the perspective of an outsider, and we spectators, or we the audience. But there's another reality, and that reality is the experience of that gun going off, the recoil, the loudness of the bang, the injuries that can be seen right in front of him are going to be different compared to other types of rounds, like dummy rounds or flash rounds or whatever. In other words, the recoil is going to be the greatest with a live round. The loudness of the bang is going to be the greatest with a live round. In fact, I think it was Joel Souza who said, that's the loudest sound I ever heard. Somebody said that. It's the loudest sound they had ever heard. And of course, the injuries, you don't have that kind of injury, a live round going right through somebody, right through from the one side to the other side, right through, and then into another person. If it's not quite a real bullet, it's sort of half a round or whatever, right? I could be wrong on that, but and so this raises this question, why is he the last to know or assume what had happened? And that to me is quite a serious question, because I've come across this in quite a few other cases. Oscar Pistorius is one of them, where Oscar also seems to be the last person to know that Reva is no longer alive. And I looked at the autopsy photos, I looked at the injuries, and there's absolutely no way that she could have lived even a few seconds. She had to have died instantly or virtually instantly. And yet Oscar seems to be the last one to know what happened. And you kind of get almost a similar thing from Alec Baldwin here. He was the guy holding the gun. He was the gun discharged when it was in his hand. And he was almost the closest to the victims when they were injured. And yet he doesn't seem to know what is going on. Someone's got to tell him. And so, again, you kind of got to ask the question, is he innocent? And I'm not asking you to answer it. Is he innocent? And then next to that, is he acting innocent, right? The same with Oscar. Was he acting innocent or was he innocent? Someone who's acting innocent, the reason they're doing that is to minimize. And they are often the last, someone who's the last to know someone, someone who's the last to know something. It can be a sign of innocence. Now, I can tell you, I went overseas and with a girlfriend, and we had a relationship, and she came back, and I think it was like around about New Year, and we were still apart up until kind of Valentine's Day. And anyway, when I eventually came home, it was maybe we were apart 2 months. I was absolutely the last person to know that she was already in a new relationship. Everybody knew, her siblings, my siblings, her family, my family, all of her friends, absolutely everybody knew. And I didn't know. And kind of in the beginning when I thought, well, this doesn't seem right, that doesn't seem right, she still didn't tell me. She was like, I'm confused. Right. And so I was innocent in that. I had no idea what was going on. And so in that particular scenario, I was the last to know, and I was innocently naive, right? But sometimes you're not innocently naive. Sometimes you pretend you're the last to know as a contrivance. Do you remember Chris Watts was the last to know, like the agents kind of, as you say to him, the agent said to him, you haven't shed one tear, you haven't asked about your kids, and then he said, well, it's because I'm hoping they're still okay, right? And it was like he was the last to know. Even Nicole Atkinson called and she knew something was going on, and so on and so on. And so that's just something to bear in mind. The other thing is, just in a general way, and this is my opinion, does Baldwin sound or seem emotional? Just if you take the first 5 minutes, does he sound or seem emotional? To me, it seems like he's making quite a rational argument. He's talking about the types of rounds, and certainly from a legal perspective, he's making quite a good case. He's saying, you know what, this never happened to me, and I'm pretty sure this is what happened, in terms of, dummy rounds, this and whatever. And he's making quite a sound argument. He doesn't seem emotional. So the first 5 minutes have effectively, if you think about it, if you sort of just summarize it, the first 5 minutes have effectively been a defense. It's not him telling you what happened. It's really telling you what has happened previously and what should have happened or something like that. But he doesn't really spend much time telling you what did happen. And I must say, in this sense, I feel the officers kind of dropped the ball, because what they need to do is stop him and say, let's go through this step by step, and not allow him to set the pace and not allow him to sort of gloss over that piece and gloss over that piece. You kind of need to slow his narrative right down. You can either start at the beginning, meaning the day of the production, and also you decide where to kick off the narrative, not the guy that you're doing the interview with. You as the officer, you set the pace of how quickly are we going to go through this stuff and where you're going to kick it off. You don't let that person do both of those things. Someone says starstruck. I don't know if it's starstruck or just a forceful personality that is being forceful, Mike says, I trust TCRS's work. I always know it's the place to come for the truth. Mace Windu, good to see you here. I often see you in the comments. He seems rational, but riding the wave of his underlying emotions. Goat Radio says this could go 50-50. BLS 13 says they allowed him to control the interview too much. And so, as I say, the first 5 minutes have effectively been a defense. He's not really describing what happened. Now, I may be jumping the gun myself. I haven't actually studied the rest yet. And maybe right at 5 minutes, 2 seconds, they do say, stop, we'll take it from here. We're now going to take you step by step. Do you think that is what happens? Anyway, so one does have to ask, who has been in control of the room of the questioning until now, right? So you might even want to sort of get a notepad, right? A notepad and sort of have a little score here. Officers, first 5 minutes, officers, first 5 minutes, Baldwin. Who had the floor during those first 5 minutes? What was it, Baldwin or the officers? What do you think the answer is to that? Who do you think kind of set the tone, set the pace, decided what was going to be spoken about, decided what was relevant? Who is in control of the room, right? And that's the first 5 minutes. Then you go into the next 5 minutes and you kind of do the same thing, right? What happens is someone gave him mods. Just have a look at what's being said in chat. Some things are really okay. So I'm going to wrap up with an anecdote. I'm not sure if I'm going to take it too much further than that. It doesn't seem, I thought there's going to be quite a lot of interest in this. There's only 150 of you in chat. I don't know if it's the time, but I'm kind of going to also not be that, I'm not going to do as much if, there's not a terrible amount of interest. So in terms of the story I told you about the little bird and the cat, I think you've kind of also got to ask the question, this is where you take it a bit further, right? You're just looking at a different scenario and you say, who's responsible for that? Who is responsible for what happened to that little bird, right? And so now I'm going to give you a bit of further context, right? So I would say if you have a garden and nothing is really going on, it's just a normal garden and there's nothing special kind of going on, and a cat catches a bird, it's no one's fault. It's just sort of nature taking its course in a way. It's just these things happen, right? But the situation was a little bit artificial. I've got sort of cages that contain like seed balls, right? And I have them in my garden every now and then, and so probably in the last day or so, I probably had it up for 2 days. I'd had one cage with 3 seed balls in and another cage with one. And so what happens is a lot of sparrows especially, but it's sometimes also other birds as well, weavers and other birds, they kind of do acrobatics. Sometimes you can have a bush filled with 10 or 20 birds and they all sort of flying around and they trying to get a bite of these seed balls. It's really nutritious. Sometimes it's held together with peanut butter. And so, in other words, what I've done is I've created a kind of a contrivance that is going to attract lots of birds. And one of the reasons why I've done this, I used to put bird seed on a feed tray, but the birds would sort of throw the seeds off, and then other birds would come on the ground, and then the cat would try and catch the birds walking on the ground. This system was a little bit better where the birds are elevated and the cat is on the ground and it can't really get to them. And so that was really the idea. And the chattering and the number of birds was so great that I sort of felt I can't really record an audiobook chapter right now just because there's too much noise in the garden. That's how many birds were out there. And so at one point I was wondering where the cat was. So I sort of went downstairs, and this is me sort of taking responsibility for the fact that I've attracted all these birds to the garden, but there's nevertheless a threat to their safety. And I haven't attracted them to the garden in order to injure them. I've attracted them to the garden in order to make it a nicer garden, in order to, winter's coming to, you know what I mean? The idea is not to lure them into a trap, right? And so I am responsible for their safety. And so I went downstairs. I didn't make a big effort, but I sort of looked for where the cat was and I couldn't see her. And then I didn't take it any further. And often in this situation in the past, I've seen the cat waiting kind of under a bush where it's very concealed, and it's sort of lying in wait, if I can put it that way. Often I did look under a particular chair that the cat also likes to lounge under, and it wasn't there. In any event, I didn't make sure where the cat was. I wanted to know where the cat was. I didn't make sure. And maybe about 10 minutes after that, sure enough, the cat caught this bird, right? And I then rescued the bird. And there's a little bit of, the bird was obviously injured. There was a little bit of red on my hand. But I could clearly see that the bird was injured. And I immediately knew what happened. And also, although I set it free, I don't know if it would have survived. I mean, I think it's a little bit unlikely. And so if I take that as a situation, I felt quite guilty about that, because what I needed to do is while the birds were so congregating in the garden, I needed to have the cat inside. In other words, that should have been the safety protocol. Bring the cat inside, close the door until the birds were sort of finished. I could see these bird balls were getting less and less and less, and would soon be nothing left, right? And so I am actually responsible for what happened to that bird, because I attracted them to the garden. I knew about the cat. The cat's previously caught birds, not that many, but has caught some birds, recently caught a mouse. And I did feel guilty. And so it was up to me to, because I had created this whole scenario, it was up to me to take control of the scenario and close the door, and that would make it safe for the birds. And so because I didn't do that, this is what happened. Julie says, thanks for your great coverage on here and Patreon. And so my question is, do you think this is relevant to rust, that you create a scenario, you create a production where certain things are foreseeable. So in a situation where you've got birds and a cat, you want to create a safety protocol so that something bad doesn't happen. By the same token, you've got lots of people and you've got guns. Should there be, and you're going to be doing lots of things with these guns, should there be any protocols in place? What do you think the answer is to that? Okay, so do you guys want me to take you through 6 new insights from the Rust body cam? 6 new things that have sort of been brought to light. Do you want me to go through that? So I'm just going to read the script, something that I prepared. So journalists and lawyers, quite interesting, are dumbfounded by the sudden dump of dozens of photos, videos, texts, and documents related to the Rust incident. There's kind of a unanimous feeling of what's this all about? Why now? What's going on? And apparently the authorities responded to an open records request from someone, we don't know who, and one wonders who made it. Now, I can't help wondering whether the timing of the release wasn't meant to be drowned out by the Depp trial, or that people would be too distracted by that high-profile case to pay attention to this one. I'm just trying to think whether an open records request didn't come out somewhere else that may have triggered someone or got someone to think about an open records request for this. I'm just trying to think, but anyway, just trying to wonder what was going on in the person's thought process to do an open records request. Was it made by a journalist? Was it made by a YouTuber? It just would be interesting to know. Or was it made by someone actually with a vested interest in this case? Because you could almost imagine from a distance that this idea of, if all of this information comes out in the middle of the Johnny Depp trial, it's almost like it would get drowned out by that people wouldn't even notice it because everyone's sort of worrying about Johnny Depp. And I must say, the Alec Baldwin stuff caught me by surprise. I actually went to a barbecue last night and I was like, wow, the one night I go out, suddenly all of this is released and I'm late to the game kind of thing. Bear in mind the footage has got to come out sometime, so maybe you want it to come out while something else is really getting everyone's attention. I'm just saying I couldn't help thinking about that. What doesn't really make sense about this document dump is the investigation is still ongoing. It's not like they've concluded the investigation. So, if you think about even the Chris Watts case, the discovery was released after everything was finalized. Well, what we're dealing with here hasn't been finalized. So it makes it kind of strange. And we've seen some cases like the Petito case and the Morphew case where the authorities either don't release discovery at all or release it after a considerable time has elapsed, right? And once the investigation is more or less concluded, that is typically when they do it. Now, we're not really seeing that happen here, but I think you could say, I think the investigation is close to being concluded. I think they're also waiting for people to come forward to say, bear in mind it was a set with like 90 people. That's besides extras. I think they're still waiting for people to come forward, and perhaps they're hoping this is going to jolt them out of their sort of lethargy or entropy. So anyway, these are the 6 insights, and hopefully you find them quite useful and quite interesting. If you've got any better ones, if you think this is a better insight, feel free to share. So the first one I've mentioned is the sheriff believes negligence was a factor. So 6 months after the incident, the sheriff remains convinced that negligence and complacency played a role. Now I want to take you back to what Alec Baldwin said. He says, my only question is, am I being charged with something? And then later on he says, we did it the right way every day, shakes his head every day. The sheriff doesn't seem to, or the sheriff seems to see things in a different way. The sheriff hasn't named any names, and the decision to press criminal charges still rests with the district attorney, not with the sheriff. So in spite of his opinion, the sheriff, it's all up to the district attorney. The last thing we heard from the district attorney was she said something like, there is some merit to Alec Baldwin's scenario, that she actually saw something like that happen where a gun was cocked, the hammer was cocked and it fired without the trigger being pulled. And so the last sort of noise we heard from the district attorney seemed to suggest that she was conciliatory or, friendly towards Alec Baldwin's position, or not hostile, put it that way. Interestingly, the document dump followed relatively soon after the Rust production received the maximum fine for what the New Mexico Occupational Health and Safety Bureau described as plain indifference. That report came out barely a week before the document dump. So I do wonder, did the document dump, was it kind of incentivized? Did someone kind of get the idea, we actually need to keep this out there. We need to keep this in the crosshairs of, we need to keep the public talking about it. Then the second insight, Baldwin appears to have blood on his boot. And I wish I could show you a picture of this, but I can't. I don't actually have the source of it. But it's a very thin line of blood, probably that long, probably about as long as a pen, almost a very thin line of what appears to be blood going from the top of his boot straight down. So it's the front of his boot as well. And there appears to be something on his boots as well that could be water or could be something else, covered by dust. Have you guys seen that particular image? So in terms of this image, we know that Baldwin was standing so close to Helena Hutchins, by some accounts just 2 feet. Others say 4 feet, but still clearly close enough for blood to splatter onto the top of his left boot. So I'm just saying the situation or the scenario was such that it was possible. It's not clear, though, whether this was fake blood or not. You'd have to test it. It's possible that what you're seeing there is actually fake blood. I'm not saying it's definitely her blood, but it's possible that it is. But apparently he did have fake blood on him as well, and that could also have dripped down. I'm just saying that this image makes clear the possibility that it could be not fake blood, put it that way. The fact that both victims at the scene immediately started bleeding profusely makes Baldwin's earlier version that he thought Helena had merely fainted, despite the loud bang, despite the recoil, despite the smoke and the sparks, seems to make that, I think, a little bit unrealistic. Number 3, officers instructed crew several times not to discuss the incident amongst themselves. And you might say, what's the big deal about that? So what if the officers said, guys, don't talk amongst yourselves? So what if they did or they didn't, right? Well, this is what it comes down to. You have law enforcement, you have an authority figure in the situation, and they are now actually in control. So whether the producers were originally in charge of the production or the director, doesn't really matter who was in charge. As a result of what's just happened, the authority now gets turned over, and now it becomes a crime scene, and now the whole situation becomes under the auspices of law enforcement, and so they have absolute authority in these circumstances. And yet the crew can be seen and heard discussing amongst themselves what's happened. And from the body cam that I've watched, I'm not sure how many of you have watched all the body cam or some of it. The officers repeat this instruction more than once. I heard it at least twice. You have the police ordering the crew to do something, and they actually also, besides saying, we don't want you to talk about it, they also say, we need you guys to move apart from one another. And they don't really do that either. And so if the police ordering the crew to do something goes unacknowledged, you've got the police telling them. It's difficult to believe ordinary crew being given instructions that was followed like a very well-oiled machine. You get my point? The insight comes through that. There's also a moment when an officer asks Baldwin to wait inside his vehicle. It's kind of like they want to talk to him, but they're sort of waiting for a few things to happen. And I think they're also trying to separate him. And so that they kind of make the suggestion that he can wait inside his vehicle. That is a kind of a private space. But Baldwin actually resists, saying he won't be able to smoke inside his car. So the officer says, do you want to wait? I think it's in his own vehicle. And he says, well, I'm not going to be able to smoke in my car. In short, no. Do you want to wait in your vehicle? No, I'm going to smoke. So was the set a tight ship, as some have claimed, or was it chaotic? Then number 4, many loose casings were found scattered outside the church. Now, I'm not quite sure what this means. On the one hand, it could mean that they were doing other scenes outside the church already, that they'd already conducted other scenes outside the church. But then I've got to ask, so would a gun discharge blank rounds and dummy rounds in the same way that it would sort of discharge live rounds? It does seem a bit odd that there are these blank rounds lying around. And I think the question that also arises is, are these rounds lying around? Were they reaching from live rounds? So just a question. So, and that brings us to this thing of, did plinking happen on set? It still hasn't been determined whether plinking occurred on set, but prior text messages from the armorer, Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, from a previous movie project, so this actually happened months earlier, she contacted Seth Kenny asking him for live ammunition. So she's busy with a movie, she's asking him for live ammunition. Not quite sure what that was about. I don't know if it was to test the sort of somewhat old weapon. I don't know if that was the point of it or what the point of it was, but Kenny responded, quote, "It's a serious mistake, always ends in tears." Pretty portentous words there. So Hannah asks for live ammunition and Kenny responds, "That's a mistake, always ends in tears." And then that brings us to the penultimate insight, number 5. Increasingly, production has been fingered for abdicating responsibility. So there's a quote from today.com. Quote, critically, the OSHA also determined that production failed to call Hannah in to perform her armorer duties and inspect the firearm right before its use in the impromptu scene with Baldwin. As we have stated before, had anyone from production called Hannah back into the church before the scene to consult with her, this tragedy would have been prevented. And so in that short paragraph, production is mentioned twice. Firstly, the OSHA has determined that production has failed to call Hannah. And secondly, production had production tried to consult with her, this tragedy could have been prevented. And then the last one, number 6. Interestingly, Hudson's attorneys have reserved comment but appear displeased with the dump. They're not like glad that it happened. So, it's possible that they what's the word? That they made the open source request and are pretending that they didn't. I'm not sure if I believe that, but it's interesting that they apparently are not happy with what has happened. And so Brian Panish, a lawyer for the Hutchins family, said in a statement that he was surprised by the sheriff's office decision to release such a large amount of evidence while the investigation remains ongoing. I must say, I feel the same. We know that the ballistics evidence is still not out, the medical report's still not out. And then he went on to say, for this reason, we're not going to comment on the material released. And then he just said that we hope that the press will use their discretion. So that is it. Well, I don't know, for some reason this felt like a really long live, but it's only been 75 minutes, but it felt very long. I'm not sure why. Status Quo, what movie are you talking about? Status Quo says, there's an ironically telling scene of Baldwin in his role in Search for Red October. It is a good film. P. Willie says, Hannah was kept outside because of COVID-19. I have heard that. So I would answer that yes, but I think there's another part to that answer, and the other part is that somewhere I think she spoke about she has so many days that she's got to work on prop duties, just like ordinary prop duties, and so many days armor duties, right? And I think there was some discussion with someone, Pickle, I think that's her surname, that she's kind of used up all her armor days. Bear in mind it's like I think a 21-day shoot or a 22-day shoot, and they'd allocated a certain amount of days to prop duty and a certain amount to armorer duty. And I think she'd used up all her armorer days, armorer duty sort of time. So one could argue that that was something else that was happening. You could also argue that she was pressed for time, and everyone knew that, and it was sort of tacitly approved that she be busy with other things. I think there was going to be another scene with other weapons, and she needed to have those prepared as well. And so, anyway, it seems like it was consensual that she not be there. There doesn't seem to be a sense of where's Hannah. It seemed like she was doing what she was supposed to be doing according to what was on the schedule that day. That's how I understand it. But if you compare Hannah to, I don't know if it's an effective comparison. Yeah, it's not an effective. Let me not do that. Dance Mad 1000, interesting avatar. Safety should come before everything else. Zircon says thought-provoking. Patricia Burns says Baldwin tried to throw the camera people who had walked out the previous day under the bus by suggesting they may have put that live round in the gun. Did he? As far as I know, I don't know if was he strongly suggesting that, or was it just what, I don't know if that was specifically done. But I do know that some people have been speculating that they could have had a motive, and I think that just sort of muddies the whole thing, because I don't think that did happen. I mean, they loved Helena, and Helena was very sad to see them go. So yeah. P. Willie says Alec Baldwin received the gun from the assistant director, not Hannah. That is a clear breach in said gun safety protocol. That's true. Oh, so Patricia, you've obviously watched further into the interview than I have. I don't know if that's true. You say he insinuated it to the two that were taking a statement. Well, we'll get to that. I don't know if I'm going to continue this series. I'm a little bit bummed out that there are not even 200 people watching. I'm not really sure what's happening to my channel. It seems like I'm not doing very well, or the war in Ukraine or Johnny Depp or something is getting everyone's attention. Or I've lost my touch. I don't know. I'm not quite sure. But it's definitely a bit of a bummer. Patricia Byrne says Baldwin didn't seem to know any of the crew's names. That's quite interesting. Graham Staniford says safety doesn't sleep. There's always time for safety. Robbie Robbins says you still have your touch. Thanks, Robbie. From a member. It's the Johnny Depp trial. Thanks, guys. I appreciate that. Dance Mad 1000 says it's 11:30 at night here in the UK. I'm about to go to bed. You're not going to believe what I'm going to do. I'm going to get on my stationary bike. Probably half an hour from now, it's when a broadcast of the tour of Romandy resumes. And so I'm going to do a little bit of cycling, yes, at 1 o'clock in the morning. Because I covered the Baldwin footage last night, so I came home after a party quite late, had to catch up with all of the news, and the first video I put up required quite a lot of editing and syncing and whatnot, so I only got to bed at 4 o'clock in the morning. So I've already sort of wrecked my sleep cycle. So I'm going to cycle at 1 and then maybe watch some news after that and maybe narrate another chapter, and then hopefully I'll be ready for bed after that. So we'll see. Patricia Byrne says, I found the atmosphere around the set in the body cam very calm and quite eerie. Dance Man says, what time is it where you are? It's midnight. And it's particularly cold tonight. Julie W says the Depp trial is like eating McDonald's. Okay for 10 minutes, but too much makes you queasy. Well, not for lots and lots of people. There are lots and lots of people who can't get enough of it, and there are definitely a huge amount of people that are watching it. I think what's quite interesting with the Depp trial is it's not only the true crime community, it's also ordinary people that like Johnny Depp, and ordinary people that like Amber Heard, or ordinary people that don't like Amber Heard, or ordinary people that don't like Johnny Depp. I've got a very clinical view of Johnny Depp, and it's just based on two things. The one is his previous appearance in court in the UK, and what was his step. In other words, the previous findings. That to me matters. You can't just like dismiss what was found in court previously, and effectively is going to court again on similar testing similar issues. And so I just find it a bit odd that you say, well, I don't like what that country said about a legal issue, so let's try the same thing in that country. It's possible that you could have a different outcome, but I personally don't see that, but who knows. Stephanie says, if there's a focus at CrimeCon you'd like me to take on a case, John Ramsey's presentation, message me. Okay, I will do. Funny enough, I was at a barbecue last night, and I was in this incredible house, and this guy turned his whole house into like a shrine to comic book characters, and he's a married dude with kids. It's not like he's a guy living on his own. It's not like the 40-year-old virgin. but he's like got in one particular room, like the bar, they're like swords all over the place. There's suits of armor. There's like a throne. There's shields that he's kind of made. Lots of armor, helmets all over the place. And then he even showed me that he'd built a Halo costume, gone to Comic-Con in Johannesburg in South Africa, become a bit of a celebrity there. He showed me his comic collections, which he's got framed, and on and on and on. And it was just really amazing seeing someone so enthusiastic and so caught up and so creative and so like this total nerd, and yet his job is that he puts up blinds. His job is that he puts blinds up. And I said, you should try and go into YouTube. If people are interested in true crime, they're 1,000 times more interested in. There's a much bigger audience for Star Wars geeks and Batman and DC Comics and whatnot. So, I found that quite interesting, that he's kind of effectively, although he loves this stuff, he sort of turned his back on it in terms of his work. And in a way, I've not done that. I've sort of turned towards the things that I'm interested in, such as Van Gogh. So, yeah. If you can do that, if you can turn your work into your passion, then you will never work another day in your life, kind of thing. Stephanie, how many days is it to CrimeCon? Isn't it very soon? Isn't CrimeCon like just around the corner, like this weekend? Status Quo says the import of the Deb case, when did you stop beating? Okay. Patricia says, what did you go as? No, I didn't go to Comic-Con. I just went to this guy's house. Julie says she sees an analogy with Alec's case and the poor boy who died on the ride in Orlando. Stephanie says, I leave at 3 a.m. Are you leaving at 3 a.m. tomorrow? Is it that soon? Tomorrow's Thursday, isn't it? Stephanie, are you leaving like tomorrow? Oh, who would I go as then? I don't know, Batman? I don't know. Oh, tonight. Wow, that's pretty amazing. So Stephanie's going to Comic-Con. Cotton Star is, I think, there are one or two other of our members that are going. So it's going to be really interesting to hear what they've got to say. I hope you guys are going to take photos, take some video, and then I'll try and share it on my community page on YouTube. And I'd love to talk to you guys when you come back. So take some notes, take some notes, and I don't know, get some souvenirs and get some quotes, and we'll definitely see what's sort of happening at these sort of festivals. I did make an attempt to go. I did reach out, but they said that they've still got a lot of folks who were going to appear at the previous one that was cancelled because of COVID, and they've got to still honor those. And so the amount of openings for this year was very limited. So, but maybe next year or the year after, we'll see. Mike says that will be fun for you all going. So it will be nice to actually have some true crime rocket science folks meeting one another for the first time at that venue. Wish I was there to also shake hands and say hi, but maybe in the future. Patricia Byrne says, I wish I could go. I think there's another one coming in Florida, and there's another one coming in Scotland. Is it in Glasgow? I'm not sure. Sharon Lynn says, it's their loss. Patricia Burns says, your April Fool had me whooping with joy. Yeah, I feel like I kind of had to put up a video saying that was an April Fool. I just never got round to it. Okay. So guys, we're at 1 hour 30. I'm definitely feeling my voice a little bit, but thank you for tuning in. I'm really glad that we got a chance to connect a little bit, especially to say goodbye to Stephanie and wish her well. I think it's going to be an exciting trip. I think she's going with her mom as well, so it should be a fun little shared adventure for them, and lots of little things lined up for them. So I think hopefully we can share their journey to the extent that they shared with us. So I will try and debrief Stephanie when she gets back. So Stephanie, make sure you remember your highlights. You must, because I'm going to ask for the highlights package. So I'm sure, Stephanie says, I'm going next year, Nick, join. Okay, yeah. Patricia says, you look fab, really healthy. Do I? I did have a really good meal at my dad. Maybe that helped. Okay, guys, thanks a lot for tuning in, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care.